Hi, Matthew.
How you doing, Jackie?
Oh, it's been a crazy week, and but there's so much going on. I'm really excited to hear what the late breaking news is on Afghanistan. Then we're going to talk about Iran. I think we didn't really talk about the order. I'd like to talk about the Benazir Bhutto report too.
Sure, we can do that. And I think the elections in Sudan definitely deserve need some comment. But
okay.
I want to start in on a fast breaking story here at the UN that involves this. People may remember there was an attack in Afghanistan last October on this guest house where most of the UN staff were staying. Those working on the election.
Absolutely, that was a brutal attack.
It was, and there were 5 UN staff killed, and very quickly thereafter the UN pulled its staff out of the country. The Secretary General Ban Ki-moon went to the General Assembly and said, this showed that the UN is a target and needed more funds. It was, every single, Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, spoke and said it was the Taliban. Everyone said it was the Taliban.
Right, I thought that was clearly understood.
Well, here's what happened. I'll again, as usually in these stories, I know the things that as things came to me, I came to know them. A couple of weeks ago, started to get emails from these UN staff that I know in Afghanistan, and basically saying that since about January, they had been aware and increasingly aware of an alternative theory of the death of at least 4 of the 5 UN staff that were killed. And the theory, not the theory, they're saying that Afghan national forces actually killed 4 of the 5. 3 of those probably, what would be called friendly fire, like in the heat of battle, killing the wrong people. But one of whom, a UN security officer who's actually a U.S. citizen, Louis Maxwell,
right, he's from Miami.
By most accounts, executed, killed not during the firefight, but afterwards, pretty much in cold blood. So.
But I thought that I've read a little bit about this, but I thought the American national was killed because of mistaken identity, because the Afghan national forces believed he was Taliban.
Here's
don't
the
ask
problem
me
with
how they could have concluded that, but I thought that was the.
Here's the problem I want to sort of go into it because it's again one of these things where obviously what happened. I don't think but basically the UN has known since January that what it had said about, all 5 killed by the Taliban probably wasn't true.
So now, just to back up, does it appear that at least 1 was killed by Taliban?
Oh, 1 was killed in the fire. So if you accept, which, most people still do, that there was an assault on this guest house by the Taliban, then you can attribute a death in the fire to the Taliban.
Okay,
right?
so no one's disputing that the Taliban assaulted the guest house.
I don't know if no one's disputing it. I think what they're investigating is who killed, and the central one becomes this idea of Louis Maxwell. And I guess the reason I want to say is that the death, or what has been now called murder of Louis Maxwell, took place on film. Not very good film, but a grainy cell phone video. And it's pretty clear that he didn't have a gun raised, and there was no shooting. And
now,
he goes down.
Who took the cell phone video?
That's unclear. It was provided by they say a German diplomat. That's all that's said. But the thing, here's what I want to say, Jackie, because I think this is where I wanted to lead with this one. I think literally it's something where a week ago I would say that nothing had been said publicly. People just assumed that it was still the Taliban. All at about the same time. I'll just focus on what I know from here. I started going to the noon briefing every day based on these emails from UN staff and asking, was there an investigation being undertaken by the UN and the U.S. FBI of these deaths? And if so, why hadn't this really troubling not just theory but video had been somehow said publicly about it? And at with the staff there, I want to go back. What the staff there say is that it's widely known among UN staff for some time that in all probability Louis Maxwell was killed by Afghan national forces, and that as UN staff they asked their leader, which would be Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, to do something about it, say something about it, raise it to the Afghans. And their concern was that the whole thing was being covered up. That's their word,
The concern of UN staff who have been contacting you.
That is correct.
Okay,
and both regular staff in Afghanistan and security staff here in New York. And I think the reason I think that's important is because the UN has now taken it upon itself to vehemently deny any cover-up, to pretty much attack anyone that was saying there was a cover-up. And I want to say that that's their own staff that feel that way. So if even if, it depends, we're like, how do you define a cover-up? Does a cover-up mean something that you knew that probably should have been said publicly you didn't say? If that's true, then it is a cover-up. Things have moved very quickly.
But let's just, what is it that just happened what is it that just happened today that you learned?
Okay, no. What's happened now is although it might have been on a different time schedule, because of all of these things coming together, questions being asked, the video being leaked to Stern in Germany and put online.
Right.
The UN began to have this official, Tony Banbury, also an American, who's now the number 2 in the Department of Field Support. They've said publicly, they said, we can't answer any questions about the investigation until it's completed. But then they wheeled out Tony Banbury to do at least 2 interviews in which he's put forward the theory that you're saying is the case. Again, nobody has seen the report, and I think it's obvious. Clearly, Banbury has, and I've spoken to people that have seen the report. But it seems highly, after for so many months saying nothing about it, suddenly there's the allegation that the UN is covering up, and so instead of coming forward and saying we'll have a press conference, just as they did on the Bhutto report, you can ask questions about who we spoke to, who we didn't spoke to, why we think. They've done these it's kind of like a spin. It'd be like, maybe it seems like a defense more like sort of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs gets charged by the SEC. They're free to decide,
We were looking for some Goldman Sachs convergence, but
we
wait.
We will. I'm just saying it as an aside. I guess
I'm
saying it as an aside because I think, because from what you seem to be like, let's say if the UN, now on Monday, they will finally do this press conference, and they will not release the report, but they will say what the report is. And for me, again, I have to say this, I think that it's sort of because all of these things, there's not going to be conclusive. You're going to hear that maybe there was a sniper. You're going to hear, maybe because Louis Maxwell was firing on the Taliban who attacked the guest house, who were dressed as Afghan national forces, maybe he by mistake fired at actual Afghan national forces. This is the most benign explanation, because then it would be, it's sort of like it's not their fault that they killed him, right?
Okay, I just want to make one observation, and I'm not speaking to defend the actions of Ban Ki-moon or the Secretariat or to suggest that they're handling this perfectly at all.
No, I'm sorry if I'm a little ramped up because I want to say that,
it's great. It's great that you're ramped up. This is a breaking news thing. I mean, there's been a little bit of talk of this.
I think you're going to see a lot next week. There's an NBC piece that came out this week, and I believe that ABC News is actually in Kabul filming about it. So actually, I want to say that. Again, we'll never be able to...
I just want to ask a question.
Please.
Because I think this is kind of important to as soon as I understand that there could have been a friendly fire incident, an American citizen involved, who shot who when, the thing I'm thinking immediately is family wrongful death suit, UN legal implications.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering whether the reason that there suddenly hasn't been this burst of transparency is that in fact UN lawyers are in the room and are saying, we can't even begin to discuss this publicly until we have figured out what our own liability is.
No, and I think that may be generally. Sadly to say, although this guy it's important to note he was a UN staff member from the safety and security, not a court peacekeeper. But peacekeepers get killed, not sadly, not totally infrequently.
Peacekeepers are in the country under totally different.
The UN has total immunity. I think personally, and tell me if you think this is too far out, but it's that Louis Maxwell's death is now inconvenient, right? Both the UN and the U.S. are trying, despite many insults from Hamid Karzai, to work with Hamid Karzai because he's the only game in town, right? So Hamid Karzai has been able to say publicly that the UN stole the election, right? He said that. He said to the U.S. that if they push him any harder, he'll join the Taliban. And basically, both organizations have sat back because they say, what's the alternative? And so, when you think about it, the evidence mounting that a UN staff who was also a U.S. citizen was actually killed by Afghan national forces. It's not a convenient thing to raise. This was when it was first raised by UN staff in Afghanistan. That was their theory. It had nothing to do with legal liability or anything. They're basically saying that ever since the dust-up between Galbraith was involved, right, the number 2, who was a U.S. guy who said the election was filled with fraud. Since that dust-up between the UN, or at least the number 2 in the UN in Afghanistan, and Karzai, the mission has been running extremely scared. They will not criticize anything. Because they're very, as they are in Sudan and other places that we'll discuss in a minute, the UN is always now able to say, we think we'll be thrown out, so we better just buckle down. So I think it's one of these, if anything, and maybe there's even, going to be more to it. I never like the idea of cutting off. There are some theories that because this attack took place, while there was a dispute of the election, that maybe it's a rogue element. I just don't like the idea of saying we know that it was all a mistake. This is with the UN.
What you say, Matthew, could be absolutely true.
Yep.
It could be. It is an inconvenient death. But what I disagree about is that the truth will not out. Right? I mean,
I'm not sure.
What
you know
you're
what?
writing about, what Colin Lynch is saying, and obviously this. If two networks are now doing the story is going to come out.
I think it just may not come out of the UN report. I just want to, and it's not to be. I've gotten into a bit of hot water over here by having used the word cover-up. Literally, the spokesman himself in a noon briefing said, "You've used the word cover-up, and it's outrageous." And it's like, I don't think it's outrageous. I think also, number one, it's a quote from UN staff, but number two, when you know something and you say nothing about it, and you do your best to dissuade. I mean, I've put in a series of just factual questions. One of those: does the UN still have in its possession the gun that Louis Maxwell had, so like a high-end assault rifle? One of the theories is that the Afghan National Forces killed him to take his gun. That's not a very high-profile theory. It would actually, although it wouldn't make it benign, it would make it less political. But these are like factual questions, simple questions.
By the way, I just have a simple factual question. Was he? You know how the guest house there was a courtyard, there was a kind of perimeter area, and then there was the guest house. The attackers penetrated this gate and got into the inner courtyard.
He was up on the roof. He went from the roof. He fired.
Okay.
He literally. And again, there's also this very strange dispute where right after the attack, the Secretary General chided the Afghan National Forces for not having come for 90 minutes, whereas they then came back and said, "No, we were there in 2 minutes." When you see, and we're going to link on the blogging head site to the video, you'll see that there was no firing at the time that this person went down. So it's the whole. Here's the one thing that you were saying. Like, I do want to say that I have confidence in two major U.S. television networks, that they'll get to the bottom of it. I want to say that
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying.
You're saying the truth will out because everyone's interested in it. I'm less concerned. I'm less convinced that a UN report done under these circumstances. I want to give you an example. When I started raising this, it was the spokesman replied quite archly that there's a high level board of inquiry, including led by external experts looking into this. Okay. And I heard internally that actually it was just run by UN staff. The reality is now turned out to be somewhere in the middle. The leader, the leader of the panel, which they're calling an outside person, was until March of this year the Department of Peacekeeping police advisor. He was a UN staffer.
Who is he?
His name is Andrew Hughes. He used to be an Australian law enforcement official.
Okay.
He came to work for the UN from 2007 on. While employed by the UN, he was named to head this panel, and then he stepped down, so then he becomes an outside person.
So are you suggesting that Andrew Hughes is not going to effectively investigate the matter?
I think there's a lot of discretion when you do these things. It's not a question of lying or not lying. It's a question of if you end up concluding that the evidence is not conclusive one way or another, it can go away.
Matthew, you've got to look.
Go ahead.
I can only imagine what the circumstances were that night, and already we have multiple cases of mistaken identity.
Sure.
I mean, and not to go into the Bhutto report, but I just, having read the Bhutto report, which I thought was amazing,
yep,
going back to a crime scene, reconstructing every little detail, it's going to be really hard. I mean, I just wouldn't prejudge the outcome. And
let me not prejudge it. I want to say that procedurally, having for the last 2 weeks here sought answers and been told that no answers could be given, and then they try a spin to the side, being told it was an outside panel, and then learning it was an inside guy that led it, and so forth. I'm dubious. That's all I'll say.
Okay, well, nothing that you've told me yet.
Yep.
Nothing that you've told me yet convinces me that this is all going to be a big whitewash. I mean, I'm prepared to be persuaded in a few weeks. Maybe it's absolutely right, but
no. Absolutely. I think we may because today's news is that they're going to do this briefing. Then everything becomes like, okay, well, let's just. There's something. I'll be honest with you. I'm not even convinced without this recent uproar. I went back and learned that the UN does somewhere about 150 board of inquiries a year. It was said to me like, you've been pushing, but we would definitely have been given a briefing about this anyway. That's not the case.
Okay.
Of the 150 board of inquiries they do every year, we probably hear of 2 or 3 of them. It's totally in their discretion whether to go public. And I personally, here's what I think, and it's different than saying that somebody would lie. I'm saying if you've publicly announced a totally believable and also convenient theory of these deaths, that the Taliban did it, Taliban, bad, killing, right? And then you become aware of that maybe, highly inconveniently, the host country killed them.
Mm-hmm.
then you
might
convene a board of
learn,
inquiry.
like we might learn that Afghan national forces pulled the trigger, right?
No, I think
I think
they have no choice. Given the video, they're going to have to say that. The question is going to become which, and I see it in the two interviews that Banbury gave, both to Colin Lynch and to NBC. They're basically trying to although there's to say you can't know, but probably it's just mistaken identity, you know. And they're in this strange position where. And it's just the problem is.
But let me just back. What do you think the motive of Afghan national forces would be for deliberately killing the UN security?
I don't know. Isn't there? There's a Canadian who was then a UN official and now is left. That said, governor in Kandahar
is the implication that there's Taliban inside the Afghan national forces that are undermining? I mean, if that's the implication, I completely buy that.
Oh, absolutely, totally. And in fact, in Kandahar, there was an allegation by a then high UN official,
right,
Alexander, saying that the governor, that a high official in Kandahar was responsible for a car, for an IED car bombing attack that killed UN personnel. So it's not like, and so all I'm saying here, and again, that wouldn't even if that were the case, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. But I'm pretty clear from the way that they've gone about this that that's not. They're hoping that's not the case. And
I think we have to just underline this with a big "to be continued." And,
we can do that.
And hey, listen, I'm eagerly awaiting. I really hope that you and the other people covering this get to the bottom of it, and that the UN decides to be as transparent as possible. I'm willing to it's been a few months, and maybe things haven't happened as quickly as they should have, but. I'm looking forward to.
I just want to say, in terms of transparency and stuff, it's like they literally try to shut down questions by saying things like, "We're talking about a death here," and it's like, exactly, that's why we're asking the questions,
Right.
And then they're like, "Well, we're talking about our own person," so I don't know why. I may not have conveyed it correctly to you why the whole situation is so dubious, but I do have some confidence that now with the spotlight on, something at least some step closer to the truth will be taken.
Okay, all right. Well,
but I want to turn this. I want to turn it. I know that you are. I want to say you're Miss Iran sanctions or Ms.
I
Iran
miss Iran sanctions. Yeah. Well, I actually maybe before we talk about Iran sanctions, I really wanted, because I think it segues nicely to talk about the Bhutto report.
Okay.
Which is a UN report done by a 3-person commission.
Yep.
And I just want to say, when I first open this document, I thought I'll scan it, read the executive summary, get to the conclusion, kind of get the main, and I couldn't do that because I was just so immediately sucked in. We've talked about like reading UN reports, your eyes glaze over. This report is so well written. It has a sort of cinematic. Well, of course, it was this horrendous event, but it really details the kind of the lead up to her assassination. Everything that transpired between Bhutto, her inner circle, her discussions with the government, her concerns about security, the day of the event, everything that happened, what unfolded in the hospital. I couldn't put it down. I actually have a few more pages to go, so I'm not at the very, very end. And I just want to. I think that this report should stand as I think a model for UN reporting. Mm-hmm. On the subject of bringing transparency and the disinfectant of the clean light of day to an issue. And, it's also kind of an emotional read because, she inspired, I realize she's a highly divisive figure to many people. Many people don't see her as a hero. But I think that you can't read this report and not come away with the feeling that there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Pakistan who felt very strongly about her and, strong affection for her. Anyway, so I thought this report was fantastically done, and it showed, it amply supported that, all the things that you would expect could have gone wrong with her return to the country and security, all of them went wrong. There was no communication. Things having to do with sort of the unique nature of Pakistan and the authority of provincial governments versus the central government. I mean, everything that could possibly have gone wrong went wrong, and yet there's this whole debate which this report got into about whether she was killed by gunshot wounds or by hitting her head on the rim of the window escape hatch in her Toyota Land Cruiser in the vehicle. And this report clearly states that, all of the available evidence, and there wasn't an autopsy, so that's a whole other separate thing, suggests that she was, there were 3 gunshots fired by man in the crowd, and there's video of him, and then the guy right next to him a second later detonated the suicide bomb, this 15-year-old boy, and she was killed. The experts conclude by the blast from the suicide bomber, not by the gunshots. But that's still an open question and still debated by many people. But I don't know. This is a small thing, but one of the things I appreciated about this report was that they referred to the suicide bomber as a boy, because he was. Sure. And I am hoping that, I don't have much left to read, but I'm hoping that there's some information about him. I'm always curious about these 15-year-olds who put on suicide vests. Anyway, I don't know. I know this report has gotten, this report is sort of seen as being unusually frank and direct, and, what can you say about...
Yeah, people were surprised. I mean, I think you may have heard that it was supposed to have come out at the end of March, and then there was this really last minute, so everyone was all revved up for it. It was already delayed by 3 months, but the person who led the panel is Geraldo Munoz, who...
Yeah, a Chilean diplomat.
The ambassador of Chile. Some have said because of the change in government there, and he was actually... needing a UN job, but ironically, he did such a good report here. I was speaking to an Indian diplomat about it. It's not clear that everyone here sort of knows that is looking for a UN job. He was actually listed as one of the candidates to become the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. He's a very nice guy, but it's sort of like he's been putting himself up for these kind of assignments, sort of in anticipation of needing to. And many people do that. It's not to be cynical.
You mean because he wants to stay in New York, he doesn't want to go
back?
Yeah,
exactly. And I was speaking with somebody yesterday. There are other. This is also true of Egypt's ambassador here. He sought the job as UNDP's number 2. A sort of protocol type person that sits in on these meetings between the Secretary General and ambassadors, which take place every day, said it's very frequent for on their way out for ambassadors.
Oh, totally.
Not in the official meeting, because then of course they're representing their country, but on their way out, to sort of hobnob the Secretary General and be like, hey, I'm interested in this post. And the question on that, this is obviously a sidebar, the question on that is like, is this a conflict? Like, it'd be totally fine if like Egypt, let's say, said like, here's our guy, we want to get him a job in New York. Then it's like, there's a confluence between Egypt's, lobbying interest in whatever its positions are, and this one diplomat trying to find him a job. But
it's true that there are like the two different tracks. There's like the private conversations that the soon-to-depart ambassador has with the Secretary General about, I don't have great... Because, like, let's face it, for many ambassadors, getting to New York or Washington, that's kind of the senior position, and if you're not going to go back and be foreign minister, you're going to teach at a college, and life's not so interesting, it doesn't pay as well, the D1 salary in New York, we've talked about this, pretty nice life you can have. So, so there are the private little conversations on the margins, is there anything for me? And then there's when the governments kind of come in with a big heavy foot and say, we want our guy for this. And they're sometimes not in, sometimes they're cross purposes with one another.
Well, not even cross purposes. I think the again, not to always be looking, but something I've become aware of here is, and you'd think like the place would be above it, but for example, when an ambassador, or even a senior diplomat of a country on the budget committee, for example, their time is to run out in the foreign service and they want to get a job at the UN, it's very easy for the UN to leverage that. So, for example, if you're on the budget committee voting on on the budget of UN peacekeeping, and it's known that you want a job in New York, they can say, you're going to end up changing your position or pushing less hard in one direction because you want to work for DPKO. It's a total conflict, actually. It's the same. I see it as similar to the issue of sort of like you shouldn't go, and this has been accepted by the Treasury Department even before the Geithner era. You shouldn't be able to go from being a bank regulator to working for a bank, especially the one that you used to regulate, because it creates the impression that in the final days of your regulation, you went soft so you could get the job. Well, in the UN, there really is no regulation. There's no law. There's no oversight. The only oversight there is like the budget, right? Ultimately, the General Assembly, which has very little power of any other kind, can say we're not going to fund something. Even if the Security Council says this should be done in Sudan or this should be done in Chad, if the General Assembly doesn't fund it, it doesn't happen. So this is their one power.
But getting back to Munoz,
absolutely. So Munoz did this report, and people were very... There was this strange thing at the end of March where a request was made by Pakistan to delay the release of the report for 15 days. And it was said that this report was sort of under seal, like the Secretary General hadn't seen. No one except Munoz and his 2 collaborators had seen it. So there was a lot of anticipation on April 15th, where in very short order, actually, again, this is the kind of the nitty-gritty of what happened. Munoz was supposed to meet with the Secretary General at 4:30, give him the report. Secretary General would turn around and give it to Pakistan. The Pakistani ambassador had scheduled a stakeout with the press at 5:15, which really means, I mean, if you're having a hard time reading it, he had counted on reading the report in 20 minutes and then stepping in front of the camera and saying, none of it is true. As it turns out, he canceled it. He canceled it, whether it is because it was too long or because too damning. And so then Munoz showed up at 5:30 and was supposed to do his press conference explaining the report, except that for some reason, no one was given, even in the hour between 4:30 and 5:30, nobody gave the press the report. So there was kind of something of a riot, saying we don't want the press conference to start until we can actually at least speed read the executive summary. Mm-hmm. Finally, this was arrived at. It got out. There was kind of some great scenes of like people read, because there weren't enough copies. It was a fiasco. The spokesman freaked out. People read it to each other out loud, and then Munoz launched into it. It was really, everyone was shocked at how forthright it was in saying, not necessarily. It doesn't have as many names as it might. It doesn't definitely say like, who killed Benazir Bhutto. It was X. It doesn't say Musharraf. Right. It doesn't say, but it does say very clearly that the Pakistan authorities at the time were at a minimum negligent and therefore, to some degree responsible for her death.
Right.
And and it's led in Pakistan itself to 7 officials that are mentioned. I mean, there's no names redacted, but you can tell that they went out of their way to not name names. They also, I'm going to get this in a sec, tried to not name who they spoke to, right? But it became pretty clear who they didn't speak to. But they still, there were some names in there, and 7 individuals have been sort of suspended in Pakistan and told they can't leave the country.
Oh no, it's clear when you're reading it. You can sort of tell who's talking. You can almost sort of hear the person, like her personal security guard who was provided to her by the government. I want to say it was Imtiaz. I might get that name wrong, but the one that he had worked in her security detail while she was prime minister in the mid-1990s, and so when she returned, the government gave her a choice of 3 or 4 people, and she chose this one individual who, in the report, you imagine him talking to Munoz and his people, but you can sort of hear him saying, "I told her not to stand up, in the Toyota to, wave to the crowds. I would tell her to sit down," and anyway.
One thing that sort of jumped up at me was that one of Pakistan, and again, it's actually one of Pakistan's demands when it requested and got this 15-day extension, which no one really quite understood, was that they say, having seen the report or knowing what its conclusions were going to be, they said, hey, Munoz should have spoken with Karzai. We're back to Afghanistan. Who was the last, world leader that met with Bhutto.
Yes, she met with him the day before.
And also, they said should have talked to Kandi Rice, and said should have talked to the highest security officials of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Oh, by the way, on the subject of the United States, that's an interesting thing. I was fascinated to read that while she was in Dubai planning her return to Pakistan, she went to the U.S. government several times and had said, I need help with my security. And the U.S., it just comes across, now maybe Munoz didn't intend this, and, but what was reported in Munoz's discussion of this was that the U.S. gave Bhutto and her inner circle the names of the security teams that they use in Pakistan. It was kind of like, here are the people we use, call them up. It wasn't, it didn't seem as, and the subtext was the U.S. was not proactive in recommending, an approach for her. And the other thing, of course, is that Pakistan denied her request to bring in a foreign security team. So apparently she had tried to assemble, a team of, I imagine, Mossad, or so they were the Gurkhas or somebody, would go in with her. But Musharraf said that would be a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty, and that she couldn't do that.
No, but I think also the U.S. I mean, there was. I haven't actually. I just remember reading it, so I didn't go back and find it in writing a story about the Bhutto report. But there was a long New Yorker article about about Bhutto, but having Zalmay Khalilzad, then U.S. ambassador to the UN, like good personal friend of hers, like on a private jet, they were discussing should she go back or not, and sort of playing a kind of a mediating role. So I think it was much more than just, I think.
Oh, no, and the report goes into detail about that, about how definitely the U.S. government was pro-return.
But so just to kind of, this is what jumped out at me, and so, as always in these things, there's a room full of journalists, Munoz is taking questions, so you end up sort of thinking, like, I just try to decide, like, what am I going to focus on? Because you can tell, like, are you saying Pakistan is responsible? And he's going to say, read the report, it speaks for itself.
Yeah,
so I asked him point blank, did he speak to Condoleezza Rice and to this Saudi head of security, Mughram bin Abdul Aziz, who it's really interesting how the report is written. It says that Pakistan told Munoz that the security forces of UAE and Saudi Arabia had both told them about particular threats against Bhutto the day she was coming back. And he says, well, in the case of the UAE, they confirmed this, which pretty much makes it clear that the Saudis refused to speak to Munoz. And he did confirm this. He tried to say, well, I don't want to say, who I spoke to and who I didn't, but on the ones you've mentioned, I did not speak to them. So it's kind of interesting to me. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's grist for any more, serious conspiracy, but you'd think, like, Condoleezza Rice, ex Secretary of State of the U.S., a UN inquiry into the death of this icon, Benazir Bhutto, like, why wouldn't you make the time? And I'm sure Mr. Munoz is nothing but a Latin gentleman. You know what I mean? I don't think he would have said, like, it has to be Tuesday at 3 or nothing. So right. It's a decision not to. And I think, again, some people might say, well, this is beneath her, and he was able to speak to. He also, we followed one of his co-panelists was from Indonesia, the former Attorney General of Indonesia. I kind of followed him out in the hall after it because he didn't speak. He was in the room, but he didn't speak. But we spoke to him out in the hall, and he confirmed that they also didn't speak to Zalmi Khalilzad. So it's a little bit weird, and I'm not actually.
Yeah, that actually surprises me. I would have. It
surprised me a lot. A Pakistani television channel came up to me after that and was like, "Go on camera and talk." I don't know what they did with the report because I went out of my way to say, this could just be maybe it's a Bush administration. I'm not saying screw the UN, but it does seem strange, to not cooperate.
Right.
in a high level UN inquiry. Into what happened, it seems strange. So that's what I wrote my article about.
The only like concluding thought is,
sure.
All UN reports should be written like this one.
Yeah, no. Munoz, here's hoping that the Lewis Maxwell et al. Report is even in the same sphere,
right.
And maybe it will be. But I don't want to. I know that there's an issue you're burning on, and so although I'm not burning on it, I'll try to burn.
Iran. Okay, let's talk about the sanctions resolution and what's going on with Iran. And here's why I'm not really burning on the Iran subject. I mean, I am, as I have said before, I am really concerned about the direction that Iran's nuclear program is taking itself. I think even a year ago at this time, I don't think we would have predicted this is where we'd be, because a year ago at this time, it was before the June 12 elections. We were really optimistic about all of the positive overtures that the Obama administration either had or was about to make, either with the speech in Cairo, the letter to the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, the Nowruz greeting. There were, we were really optimistic about what was going to happen. And even with the presidential elections coming up, I think a year ago, no one expected that whatever the outcome, we'd be where we are now. Mm-hmm. And, where we are now is nowhere, where I think there was a piece in the Washington Post recently, and one of the experts quoted Mark Fitzpatrick, whom I have very high regard for, said, we're settling down for, he characterized it as kind of a long Cold War, and I would really agree with that. I think we're in this a very unfortunate period where, the focus is going to be on containment, not on engagement. That's not the way we wanted it to be. A UN sanctions resolution that's incrementally stronger than the one before is a part of that, where we are right now. And so, what's happening at the UN, and the timetable of this is a little puzzling to me, because we have the NPT review conference starting in 2 weeks, so I'm a little bit unclear as to why emergency we need to get a sanctions resolution on Iran. It seems like it will really undermine U.S. objectives. No. So, on the issue of timing, I mean, we can talk about the substance of the resolution, but sure. What's the latest you've heard about when this is going to come?
I guess, I saw this piece yesterday where Joe Biden was quoted as saying he thinks they'll get it by the end of this month or in May. I think it's just from every a lot of the reporters here, this is their main focus. And so they're not, is to stand outside the UK and French or US mission when they do these P5+1 meetings.
Right.
And then try to, thrust a microphone in the face of these really pretty taciturn diplomats when they come down. But
I know, having stood there for,
you've
for
been,
some of those, that's pretty punishing.
It's
Especially
gotten
when
more
it's cold
violent,
and raining
actually. I have to say, there's a negative trend in outdoor stakeouts because this time, for some reason, they've not. I'm not kidding you. I'm not saying that they need peacekeepers, but because it's so unruly, like they won't say where and when they're doing it, so people learn at the last second. They huddle outside this building on 48th Street and 2nd Avenue. And when the guys come out, there's no railings.
And there are two exits from that building. You don't know which one they're going to go to. So half the people are on the other side. It's a nightmare.
What I'm saying is that I've noticed it from the last resolution. There's a lot more scrambling, and there was.
Yeah.
I mean, the Susan Rice got a microphone bounced off her nose from one of my colleagues here. There was the Chinese was chased to his car. It's getting
it's getting harsh.
I actually think among the reporters, there's a press access here issue we can maybe get to.
We have to talk about that. I think that's really important.
It's almost like, and I think the press has tried to say to them, if they just told us where it was, everything could be. And if you just had a set of a little microphone, you had a stakeout, we know how to do that. But when it's like the scrum, and especially for some of this media, getting the soundbite, even if it's nothing like.
Well, and the Japanese cover this story so intensely.
Yeah.
And so half the people at these scrums are all
totally.
representing
and even
different.
I have to speak not loud here because we're in the no whistleblower zone where everyone can hear everything. But it's even a higher percentage of Japanese media than you think because they also hire all these non-Japanese to work for them.
No, I know, it's great.
So it's great
because, by the way, if you're an American starting out in journalism and you want to get your foot in the door, you can go work for Nippon Television or any of.
You'll never get a byline, no matter how good your work is.
Right.
But you
will. They will make you stand outside, and no matter what the weather or there's to get the tiniest little morsel, they will.
No, exactly. I mean, you could, in advance, you could see just today actually. A couple of the Chinese ambassador going up the steps from a Security Council meeting about Chad will say, the process continues, P5+1, and I literally see people running from the stakeout to upstairs and snap, the process continues.
That is really bad.
But in terms of timing, I think it's high. I think with all due respect to Joe Biden, unless he knows something, which I'm sure he knows many things I don't know, but. It's looking pretty unlikely that
So just getting back to the substance of So
and then there's the issue of May.
Lebanon takes over as president of the Security Council.
Exactly, and because it's a mixed government with some
Hezbollah
representation.
But I know people sometimes you want to avoid certain Security Council presidencies if you've got something sensitive. I understand that, but in this case, you think
it's important enough that they'd say screw Lebanese unity?
I don't think. The Iran sanction. I don't think that the Lebanese presidency is going to be determinative one way or the other.
Within the UN world, the unity of parties in Lebanon is important. Now, whether for U.S. and I guess France and UK, but I would say whether for U.S. purposes, this is important enough that the stated. I would be pretty clear that the Hariri, the part of the Lebanese government that the U.S. likes, would not want this to be done under the presidency.
Oh no, there's no question.
It would be highly divisive in the country.
I'm sure they don't want it done.
So the question, and this is where I wanted to be a little bit cynical. I think that it's all right. Newsflash, but I really see it, and part of it came down, and you won't like this, but I'm going to say there was supposed to be a Security Council trip to Africa that was supposed to take place earlier this month. And it was going to be a week long. It was going to go to the Congo, try to save the mission. And Susan Rice wasn't going. And it's pretty clear that the reason she wasn't going was out of some idea that there would be Iran negotiations in New York. Or I'd say, cynically, that to be seen to be prioritizing Iran sanctions over all else. Because realistically, with the French and UK Perm Rep number one guys going to Africa, there was not going to be serious negotiations in New York. But it's sort of, there's this sense, and I really, this is why I want to say in terms of, you were saying you're puzzled by the timing. I am too, not as regards to the NPT conference. I just think somehow this administration has gotten it into its head that it needs to prove its cred to somebody on this. That this is going to show both the how good their approach at the UN is, that they'll be able to get a text, even if it's a watered down.
Right. Well, this is where I part company with that thinking. So I think it's a strategic error. I'm like, it's no secret how the U.S. feels about Iran's nuclear program. It's completely well understood by everybody.
I don't think. Have you read the right-wing press? Have you read right-wing pundits saying that Obama's in bed with Ahmadinejad?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a totally ludicrous.
Like, people need to just take a deep breath.
Okay.
The U.S. has just come off this incredibly intense and I think really positive month of making vast progress, advancing a very long neglected but very important big picture strategic nuclear arms control, disarmament, non-proliferation agenda. There's the New START treaty with Russia. There was the Nuclear Security Summit aimed at protecting and preventing nuclear materials from making their way into the hands of terrorists. And there was the Nuclear Posture Review, which for the very first time, and this has been discussed in a previous blogging head, so we don't have to go over all of this, but the Nuclear Posture Review for the first time, unclassified document, lots of transparency on the subject of U.S. nuclear policy. And, most important, the document said the biggest threat that the United States faces is not war with another nuclear-armed state, but the threat of a terrorist use of a nuclear weapon. So, the U.S. has really taken the high road to kind of coalesce international opinion around these really important objectives. Nuclear arms control, disarmament, security of nuclear materials. And so, to me, we should stay on that high road and go into the Non-Proliferation Review Conference. Not getting distracted by the Iran narrative that's going to continue to be making noise in the background. It has been, it will be. It's not going to change in 4 to 6 weeks. So, my strong view is that we should, let the Iran nuclear situation just rest for a while. That's all it's been doing anyway. And really go into the NPT review conference with this record of achievement and kind of not with the distraction of the Iran discussion.
But I mean, and again, I'll try. You're much deeper into this than I am. But just as I think that within like the Obama administration, the Iran issue is not just a subset of the nuclear issue. It's really a subset of the Israel issue. You see what I'm saying? That in the same way that they feel themselves as being under fire for what little they do, denouncing settlements or whatever, that they feel a need, whether it's a need to sort of cut a possible Israeli attack on Iran off at the pass by saying we can get sanctions at the UN, which is very much what Joe. Well, maybe we'll link to this piece about Joe Biden's statements because it was a double-sided. I think he was on The View. I didn't see it. I'm very surprised. He went on The View apparently, and he said we can get a Security Council resolution by late April, which is dubious,
right. And
that he felt certain that Israel would certainly wait before lashing out to see if those sanctions work. So in their minds, it's related. Now, put that way, it makes it look like let's pass a resolution so we can avoid this military strike.
I totally disagree with the idea that Israel is driving the timetable of the Iran resolution. Yeah. Like, Israel is more aware than anyone else of really what the stakes are in Iran. Israel knows very well what's going on in Natanz.
It's a political thing to be seen to be doing things. And that's why here I sometimes wonder, it just seems so theatrical,
yes,
to be saying, and again, I know that there are people that, and the U.S. mission didn't like the story that I wrote about Susan Rice not going to Africa and why she wasn't going, but it's pretty clear. It really was. Then the trip was shortened down to 4 days, so it would have been only 2 weekdays in Africa, Monday and Tuesday, and still she wasn't going to go. And so it's like, there's no way that on Monday and Tuesday there were going to be any P5 plus 1, because 2 of the P5 would be in Africa. As it turned out, everyone's face was saved by the volcano, because with the ash in the air, the whole trip got canceled, and so it all got erased. Like who was going to go? Now they're going to go May 13th.
Okay, I do want
what? Because I think we're because 70% of the UN's work is in Africa, and we've so far discussed South Asia and Persia. I think I'm hoping that at least some of our viewers are interested in the pretty big events that have taken place in Sudan. And I know
before we leave Iran, I just want to just go back to one point about the resolution itself, what the substance of the resolution is.
Okay.
My understanding.
Substance? Oh, sure.
Yes.
Why not?
See, this is where I'm hoping you can fill in some color for me. Right now there have been 5 resolutions that the Security Council has adopted. 3 of them contain sanctions. they're not wildly strong sanctions. They target individuals, a few Iranian entities that are associated with their missile or nuclear programs. They try to prevent financial transactions involving certain banks. So the sanctions are fairly limited and targeted in scope. This next resolution is going to expand that a little bit, and my understanding is that now and I don't think that anything is signed, sealed, and delivered.
No,
but my understanding is that they're going to broaden it out a little bit and perhaps target insurance companies that insure transit of goods between Iran and the outside world, or the outside world and Iran. That's
definitely, and a lot of it. This is really, I think this really comes down. Although Russia has its own economic interest there, a lot of this is between the U.S. and China. And a lot of it's taking place in comparison to the North Korean resolution, which the U.S. is very proud of and wants to use as something of a template here.
Okay.
And what China is saying, and it's an argument, is that North Korea is like on record. They even say they have nukes if they don't have nukes. You know what I mean? But there's no problem in terms of like slapping these things on them. They claim to have nukes, whereas Iran is still playing this coy game of we have a right to have them, or we have a right to. So I think that China, and also I think anything that the real sort of the bottom line in terms of China's vote is anything that affects economically what they can do with Iran, I don't think they're going to agree to. And I don't think the U.S. will hold out for it. And so,
so the fallback is that they get a UN Security Council resolution that's a little bit more amped up than the one before, and then the U.S. and the U.K., France, and Germany go to the EU and get the EU to adopt really tough sanctions. And I think that could have that could start to have an effect. Now,
but again, I almost think it's like they're more concerned with being able to say, you see, we worked with our partners, and our diplomacy is strong, and look, I hate to say Israel and supporters, we got this, And in terms of like whether a particular Revolutionary Guard guy is actually connected to the program or not, whether a band, you know what I mean? I just don't. I'm not sure.
I don't think anybody's naive about the impact of these sanctions. No one expects that Iran's going to wake up the next day after the EU resolution and say, "Oh, it's terrible. We have to change everything now." So I think we're settling in for this lengthy period where we're waiting maybe for a new government to come in, and in the meantime, we'll just do everything we can within the boundaries of international law to contain Iran's nuclear ambitions. And by the way, I'm just going to go on record saying this. I think Israel is going to go along with that plan. I think that Israel keeps kicking the can down the road about when it faces. It's already kind of changed its definition of red lines multiple times. I think Israel is going to continue to try to wait this out. I think Israel wants to use military force against Iran as a very, very, very last resort.
Well, yeah.
And I don't expect. And that's why I just said I think the Israeli calculus is almost irrelevant to the timing of the Security Council resolution, whether it happens at the end of April or the beginning of June.
No, but I think, and just as again, this is the sort of like, just as a fact, Ahmadinejad is on a 2-country Africa tour, Zimbabwe and Uganda. Now, the first one, Zimbabwe, is a very funny, and Zimbabwe has definitely come out in favor of Iran's right for nukes of any kind.
Yes,
I believe. But the stop to Uganda, I actually spoke to the Ugandan ambassador here this morning about it, because it's surprising to some. I don't think, I don't know if they would want to be lumped in, but they are on the Security Council. I mean, I think that's probably the rationale for the visit. There's also going to be an Ahmadinejad visit to Austria, which is also on the Security Council. I don't think they'll get very far with the Austrians, but I did see a headline today of, Uganda says there's no evidence of nuclear weapons program in Iran. So I think
that's nice.
They're trying to line up even though nobody's focusing thus far on the non-permanent members on the Security Council, they do have votes,
Yes.
and Brazil is pretty much beating the drum, saying they're not on board. And
I know,
it looks like
and it's
Uganda's not on
fascinating.
board.
I had a meeting with a Brazilian diplomat, and not that long ago, and it was Brazil's got a lot of power now, and Brazil itself is a funny kind of role model in this way, because Brazil has a big uranium enrichment program, and they have not they have not signed the additional protocol with the IAEA, which is a little bit of a thorn in the side of the United States and maybe the IAEA.
Sure.
Brazil is feeling its oats, if that's the right expression.
I think what the rumor here, and I think for news purposes, would certainly all be hoping for, is that they may come out with their own draft. You know, and say
that would be
P5 be
fascinating.
damned. Here's a new school, developing world, brick view of the world. So
what's the?
literally,
Yeah, I
wonder
if that would really be so different. I mean, because I really think that anyone looking
No,
at
I
sort
think
of
it would
just
be
the
quite
basic
different. I think
facts,
it would have a lot of language about the not just the rights.
it would have a lot
develop.
of language about right to the fuel cycle. Fine.
Right.
Fine,
and
fine,
I'm not
fine.
sure it would impose. I also think it would have no chance to become the main resolution at all.
Yeah,
but it would be a good theatric. I want to be sure we do.
Okay, you have time for I think one more topic. So what's the one other topic you wanted to talk about?
I could say corruption and then do 5 things, but I just think because Sudan, I know that every time we do these, and we mention Sudan, I get a lot of email about Scott Gration and Susan Rice, and it's been really. Sudan had an election. It was its first election in 24 years. It was pretty much fraudulent. There were threats by the president to throw observers out and cut their fingers off. There were.
By the way, I thought that Nick Kristoff's op-ed? I'll whatever, I can't remember, but I'll make sure people have there's a link to it, because I think it just would be for people who need background on the election and what happened. I think it'll be useful.
I think I'll just try to cut rather than I can narrate sort of how the number of parties that didn't run, the number of places that there were no observers, the Sudan blocking YouTube because it shows videos of ballot boxes being stuffed. I think what surprised a lot of there's now I would say there's a split between the Darfur's genocide crowd, or I don't mean that. I'm trying to think of the right. Those who are really have been concerned for a long time about the Janjaweed and the IDP camps and the Obama administration, because the Obama administration. Now, I mean, this is also true of the UN, but I think it's more interesting to see they were surprisingly hands-off and non-critical of these elections. In fact, Scott Gration, there's sort of the split is between Susan Rice, who was historically, really beating the drum on Darfur's genocide, and then the U.S.'s actual envoy to Sudan, former General Scott Gration, who said from the outset that he doesn't think Sudan reacts well to sticks, got to have some carrots, and he went and right before the election he said, I think these elections are going to be as free and fair as they could be under the circumstances, and his main argument is that the real interest here, and I don't know if he means of the Sudanese people or of the U.S. people concerned with Sudan, is the referendum in 2011, in which people in the South will get to vote if it happens, to break away from Sudan. And so the idea was sort of almost and the South Sudanese opposition groups held their nose too. One of them, they're basically on record saying, let Bashir steal the election, because this election had to take place in order for the referendum to take place. And Bashir said, if you boycott these elections, there'll be no referendum. The thing is that there's no assurance that referendum will take place, right? You're dealing with a president who's an indicted war criminal, right?
Right.
And it's it seems very strange to people, but I guess, he handled it beautifully, because if you oppose this election, if you raise too many problems about this election, it's an excuse for him to not hold the referendum. So basically you had the UN as well being very quiet. There were reports of ballots all screwed up, and the UN was well, all we do is provide technical assistance, a very carefully worded...
it definitely did seem like in this election, I didn't follow it as closely as you did, but it did seem that there was sort of the narrative that evolved was, it wasn't a perfect election, but it was good. It was as good as it could be under the circumstances.
And to be honest, I think if you do follow it even somewhat closely, they're very self-serving. It's almost like from the outset, many parties, the U.S., and I think in this case the UN really takes its. I mean, because I've written a lot about the way the UN went soft on Bashir. In fact, I've actually the UN has gone so far as to recruit a pro-government Darfur rebel that was a UN staff member in order to sort of make it look like Bashir is making peace in Darfur. So the actual Fur leader won't make peace. Abdul Wahid Noor, he lives in Paris, and he says, no negotiation until people are safe. And so the UN system literally plucked from among its staff in Addis Ababa a Fur individual and said, he's the new Fur leader. And he signed a deal with Bashir, and it said, now there's peace in Darfur. And so but the UN, its defense when you say, what are you doing, is they say, look at the U.S. I mean, this was said to me today by a peacekeeping spokesperson, or on background, I guess you could say. If the U.S. goes soft, I mean, the UN is not the one to be criticized. And so it really is interesting to see that it's kind of terrible. And I get all these really impassioned, and then the real cynics, and this was again.
But you get these really impassioned what?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should finish that. Really impassioned emails saying, how could they be doing this, or there needs to be more coverage of the Sudan sham election. People go on Twitter, put in like Sudan sham, hashtag, you're going to find a lot of, and a lot of the stuff is factual. It's sort of, I mean, again, it is a big country, and I definitely, it's not a question of being fair to Sudan. I think there was a time where the West was kind of, I would almost say, unfairly questioning or micromanaging Sudan. But it's changed. Everything's changed. It's really like, I actually see increasingly that even France and the UK, they've kind of lost, everything's sort of moving too fast for them. Their critique of Darfur has gone out the window. They're just hoping there'll be a referendum. In the Congo, they were talking about saving civilians. Now they're just trying to like make some deal with Joseph Kabila and stay in the country. They're doing the same thing in Chad. It's a very...
So do you think that this is a reflection of Ban? Or do you think this is a broader
I think part of it is he hasn't mobilized the international community to sort of focus on these real problems. I mean, he'll go, he'll pay lip service to, the rape of women in eastern Congo or Darfur, but when you actually see, like, he said to himself that Sudan is the most important thing along with climate change for the UN in 2010, and like, where's the beef, I guess if somehow by some stroke of good fortune somebody convinces Bashir to not block the referendum and to allow South Sudan to secede, maybe he gets to keep all the oil money. I don't know what the deal would be.
Right.
Then the UN will say, you see, our silence, caused that result. But it's been, but it's not. I don't want to only blame Ban Ki-moon. It's kind of, it's weird.
I think what you're putting your finger on is just this pragmatism that sometimes governs the day, and maybe it's what we're seeing in Afghanistan with the UN's approach to investigating the attack on the compound, and a little bit, I think it's what we're dealing with in Iran.
You're bringing it all together, Jackie. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, I think that, and again, it would take more time to link all these things together.
I think that there is a certain lack. I mean, like, I just kind of big picture. I mean, there is a certain, huge outpouring of idealism that has greeted this administration, the Obama administration. And look, it's impossible for it to live up to that, right? Promise? And because at kind of every step of the way, the idealism has been thwarted a little bit by reality. No matter what whether it's healthcare reform or financial reform or foreign policy, reality has a way of bringing everything down to. And I'm not trying to suggest that the UN's pragmatism in the Sudanese election issue is acceptable or should pass without comment of any kind. Maybe as you suggest, they want to keep their eyes on the referendum for seceding.
They lose credibility when they were talking like, we're going to. I'll give you an example. In Darfur, they've said, everyone has said Darfur genocide. We're going to protect civilians. They have, 26,000 peacekeepers there. It's quite an operation. I visited there with the Security Council. They have a huge camp in El Fasher. Many of the peacekeepers never go outside of it. And the reality is almost a month ago there was a slaughter of civilians in Jebel Mara region of Darfur, and the UN said it was going to go out and investigate. On the way there, 63 Nigerian peacekeepers were waylaid by rebels and gave away everything. Gave away their weapons, uniforms, everything. And without firing a shot, actually. I don't know why the head of peacekeeping has said they're investigating whether what went wrong, because they didn't fight anything. And in fact, so I've been asking like every couple of days, okay, that said, there was this ambush, but has the UN actually managed to get to Jebel Mara? And you know what? They still haven't. And it's sort of, it's weird. It's like, then you could say, well, let's blame, there are not enough troops. There just seems to be kind of a lack of will. What people approach me in front of the Security Council and say is, Matthew, if we criticize Bashir, he'll just throw us out of the country. So, okay. But the point is, at what point is being there enough? Like, what are you there for? Right?
Yeah.
So right. You don't act and you don't criticize because you want to be there.
Well, that's the essential conundrum with the UN. It was the problem with Rwanda and the run up to the genocide in Rwanda. What are we here to do? The Belgian.
I'll tell you what they're not here to do, and I'm sorry, you're going to see I'll slip this one in there. Haiti, simply because it's many people, including I'm sure many R&B singers, have said, "Don't forget what happened." I haven't forgotten, and nor I'm sure of you, but there is the UN angle to it. Is they had a big peacekeeping mission. They're running a lot of the reconstruction. Bill Clinton is like coming through the UN every day. But in the middle of all this, to house its own staff, the UN rented 2 luxury cruise ships.
Okay, wait. Just on this.
Sorry.
There's no way to decouple cruise ship from the word luxury, first of all, right?
They've tried. In fact, I was told by the Deputy Secretary General that I'm wrong. I've seen the photos, right?
Okay, wait. Now, so everybody, we're switching gears. We're talking about Haiti and the cruise ship scandal.
That's
which
right.
I think is a real non-issue, you know? I think an argument can be made for renting the cruise ship. Okay, if it's at a crazy price, that's wrong. But if it's at the equivalent cost that it would be for the UN to lease a whole hotel, do you know what they're paying?
Yes.
What are they paying?
I do. $100,000 a day.
For how many people?
200.
200.
It's all broken down. It's highly expensive.
Wait. That's not enough. Okay, 200 people at $100,000 a day. They're paying way too much.
We'll link to the numbers, but here's what I wanted to say to you, Jackie. I understand, and we can disagree about whether it's unfair to criticize the use of the love boat. Wait, can we do the math?
I can't do the math in my head that quickly.
Right. No, I actually don't, because I don't want to be tied to those figures. I'd rather post.
Okay.
I can look it up but this is what I wanted to say. I think we probably do disagree. And I'm not trying to take a pot shot, but I will say that I've been contacted by actual non-UN NGOs that work in Haiti, and they're against it because they say it makes them look bad. Their own donors are like, oh, wait, is this money going for Haiti reconstruction or for the Love Boat? And they're not, honestly, many of them, they're not mad at the media that wrote about the Love Boat. They're saying, why doesn't the UN, literally, my analysis
I don't want to defend the Love Boat. I just want to suggest this, that the idea of housing people off land when,
no problem.
When it's not adding to sort of stressing the system, I think it can make a lot of sense. Now, when the news networks go down there, I know they're all self-sustaining, and they kind of set up an encampment, and they provide their own water, electricity, generators, everything. So they're trying not to make a big footprint on the city, in the country, where obviously the focus is on reconstruction and recovery. All of that having been said, if you're sending somebody for long term, to me it makes sense to house people. I'm not saying in the lap of luxury for at $2,000 a day. That's what it would be, right? 100,000, 200 people. That's crazy. But anyway, I mean the notion of a stripped down freighter.
Stripped down, absolutely. I think again it's sort of the optics, and the problem is that the head of the UN mission there, Edmund Millay, who I know, he's usually. I was surprised to see this. When he said you can only, it's sort of like the wounded, you can only, they can only help if they're well treated themselves. And then you see the photo of this sitting room with a freaking, canopy bed. And
but wait a minute, I also want to just
like
okay,
wait,
the 200,
I'm sorry. And NGOs there said this is bad.
The 200 people who are getting housed, is this the Lindblad Sea Voyager?
There's a Sea Voyager.
Because
and there's another one with the Hugo Chavez connection, but we won't even go there.
Okay, but wait. Because, there's Voyager of the Seas, which is like a huge, mega, crazy, big cruise ship. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Lindblad Sea Voyager, which I think is small. And so when you said 200 people, that would be...
We'll just link to it. The photos are there. That's why I think... And the strange thing is that the UN is both the spokesman and the Deputy Secretary General. No one has said the photos aren't true. They've just
but it's probably, I'm just saying, the UN obviously has way more than 200 people in Haiti, so I'm just thinking it's the 200 senior people who get to stay on the cruise ship? Right? Does that make sense? I know, and I'm not saying that that's good. That's bad.
And again, we go back to, in the wake of the earthquake, it took them, a week to actually agree that they should be reporting the death of their national staff.
Right.
In the same way as the international staff. I'm just saying the whole thing.
Okay, look, here's my advice. Stay on top of the cruise ship story.
Okay.
If they're paying $2,000 a day per person, that's completely unacceptable. If they want to
house... how much, what price does it work for you?
Okay, look, here's my feeling about
it.
Go ahead. What's per diem at a hotel? Is $150 a night or whatever it is, $200 a night? Mm-hmm. So if the UN, because it's got... how many people does it have?
Note that the UN is paying, in terms of cash for work, $6 a day to people in Haiti.
Okay, but that's a different thing. That's a good thing.
I'm just...
Okay, but I'm just saying, UN staff in Haiti, how should they be housed? To me, the idea of lightening the footprint on the country, putting them on a ship at $200 a night per person, which is, gosh, it seems to me like people go take Carnival cruises for around that.
And they have entertainment, but we never know.
I think that's not crazy, but it should be a lot. It should be a significant number of people. It shouldn't just be 200 senior officials who want flat screen TVs, and that's not cool.
Segue. How about that Ban Ki-moon sparking a revolution in Kyrgyzstan?
Oh God, I can't segue. I have to run now.
All right.
Okay, we'll save Kyrgyzstan.
He's the Jenny Appleseed. Well, I hope we'll save Kyrgyzstan. I tend to believe that this president now in Belarus will still be fulminating when next we speak.
Yes.
But will he be back in Bishkek? Tune in.
All right, tune in. And also, obviously, the Afghan story.
Yes.
It's important.
Totally.
All right, Matthew,
Okay.
thank you.
Always a pleasure.
All right.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
See ya.